Yeah.
Huh.
Hello and
Oh,
welcome to session 360 in the AISafety.com reading group. Tonight, Lao Mein will be presenting his work on biowarfare risks of AI systems.
oh, hello. I'm Lao Mein. This is my presentation, and it goes over a lot of just how dangerous is conventional biowarfare and bioterrorism to industrial civilization as a whole, and also my specific pet issue about prion diseases and how all of these things interact with AI systems. Anyways, why am I focusing on biological risks in particular? Well, it's because I think human beings are uniquely vulnerable to biological risks in a way that we aren't to other risks from AI. For example, if an AI wanted to take over the world with killer drones, it first has to contract the factories and make the drones and make the software for the drones and have a plan. And as of right now, you can't have an LLM and connect various specialized AI modules to it and expect that to work out at all. You need far greater capabilities than we currently have. However, an AI that is just very good at protein folding, like AlphaFold, can actually do very, very dangerous stuff because you just need that one skill and a few steps, and you can get all the way to a really dangerous bioweapon. My preferred analogy for this is that imagine you are a super genius, like still human level, and you're stuck in a room with an internet connection and a slow PC. What is the best way to steal Bitcoin? Well, you can try to work contractor jobs on the internet, but you only have so much time and bandwidth, and then you can use that money to hire mercenaries to break into people's houses and steal their hard drives, or program drones to do it or somehow. But it's very difficult to scale up those operations. However, if you write a computer virus, you with say your super genius programming skills, you can use zero-day exploits to infect a huge amount of computers, and then those computers can infect other computers. So it's because everything a computer does is controlled by its software, you can use the vulnerabilities to spread your Bitcoin stealing virus everywhere, and this is just incredibly effective. So and this isn't a multi-domain requirement. You don't need to be good at hacking and social engineering and strategizing, all this other stuff. You just need to be a really, really good computer hacker and find these zero-day exploits, and you automatically win. In a similar way, I believe that biological organisms are uniquely vulnerable to biological warfare attacks. Now, my particular model has roughly modern AI models. We're roughly where we need to be in order to pose some of these threats. And so stuff like intent and the AI having galaxy brain plots to take over the world doesn't really play into this. But if you're curious about specific scenarios, I can elaborate. Anyways, what is my actual world model? My actual world model is that bioterrorism is really, really hard. So I previously had a view that if one intern in a biolab can just do very bad things to the world. I no longer believe that at all. I think bioterrorism is incredibly difficult, and the reality is bioterrorists have spent millions of dollars and a huge amount of effort and basically done nothing. Right? They have achieved essentially zero results. State level biowarfare programs have done much worse to people, but even when they go all out, completely zero morals, kill as many civilians as possible, they didn't get very far. World War II Japan had a plan to infect the United States with Black Plague, pneumonic plague, Black Death. They had their highly optimistic projections were 10,000. It wasn't going to happen. They did kill, by some estimates, up to 500,000 Chinese people, but that is kind of peanuts in the context of all-out biological warfare. The National Revolutionary Army, when it retreated from the Yellow River, blew the dikes, and ended up killing 500,000 of their own citizens to slow down the Japanese army. That was the type of war we're talking about. So, in the grand scale of things, World War II Japan went all out on bioweapons, and they didn't get very far. Gene editing is actually really, really hard. I have worked with people who do gene editing, and they say it's very hard. And you know, a lot of really smart people working together. You need contractors. You need an entire like production supply chain. And terrorists have tried, but terrorists are really bad at biowarfare. Anyways, prion diseases are an underexplored attack vector. Models like AlphaFold can become very dangerous if they become very good at at protecting prion structure and a bunch of other stuff. Chronic wasting disease is an existing prion disease, and it is if a prion disease appeared in humans with the same properties that CWD has in deer, then humanity is screwed. Like we wouldn't even know where to start in terms of formulating a counter response. If DeepMind doesn't think about this issue, and they keep releasing models and more data on prion structures, and they keep publishing research like they did 2 months ago, this could cause something very bad to happen on accident. If they're paying basic attention, the majority of the risk would go away. But I don't think they are. I don't think anyone's paying attention. So yeah. Now, in order to be dangerous at biology, you don't need to be good at everything. You don't need to be incredibly good at like I don't know oncology. You don't have to be good at biophysics, biomechanics, anatomy, whatever. You just need to be really good at proteins, genetics, and maybe modeling immune systems. For prions, you just have to be really good at modeling protein folding, the way that AlphaFold is. Now, AlphaFold currently isn't extremely good at predicting protein structures because you know it's actually kind of fluid, but I can't get into that. Anyways, now it turns out that most known pathogens in the world are not suitable for biowarfare. In fact, all known pathogens in the world can't really impact modern industrial civilization. It can't seriously threaten it. It can kill some people, but in first world countries, it wouldn't get very far. And why I believe this is because we've historically wiped out diseases like smallpox surprisingly quickly. Smallpox went extinct for a reason. When you compare the sanitation conditions of the modern world and the world in which smallpox was prevalent, where the Black Plague was prevalent, we have far better sanitation. And when diseases like Black Plague do pop up, when diseases like cholera, dysentery do pop up, even in the third world, they're contained relatively quickly because we have all this knowledge about epidemiology, track and trace, stuff like that. So, yeah. Now, again, Japan tried to actually do large-scale biowarfare against civilian populations. They didn't get very far. World War I, Germany was in the borderline famine. I think tens of thousands of people died in like 1918 in Germany because of food shortages. If there had been a large-scale agricultural problem caused by bioagents, they would have probably, in like 1917, they would have straight up capitulated because the alternative would have been like 10, 20, 30, 40% fatalities from starvation. And the truth is, Germany and France and Russia and I think the UK, basically everyone tried really hard to do biowarfare against domestic animals and crops, but they never got anywhere. The Spanish flu just randomly appeared in Texas or whatever, I'm not sure. So yeah. Also, biowarfare agents have specific properties, right? A long incubation period, like 20 years, is really, really bad because that's a bad strategic deterrent. You know, you don't want it to incubate for 20 years and then kill everyone because first of all, you get time to prepare. And second of all, everyone gets infected and everyone dies. So yeah, when you hear hooves, think anthrax, not AIDS. The desired properties are fast incubation time, fast incapacitation, fast death, and those help people keep track of who's infected and who's spreading the disease. And in reality, you need to be somewhat covert in order to threaten modern industrial civilization. Yeah, and the actual biowarfare agents that have been used historically, both by terrorists and by state actors, are stuff like anthrax. Soil bacteria that's relatively easy to obtain, and also like it doesn't have person-to-person spread. It only impacts the person it affects, and it's basically used like just a potent chemical agent that's easy to obtain. So terrorists can, in theory, do biogenetic engineering, but in real life, this doesn't actually work. And I don't think they're going to get really good at genetic engineering in, I don't know, the next 5, 10, 20 years, however long it takes for us to get to AGI. And also, Soren mentioned the potential for an ethnically targeted bioweapon. I think that's a very dumb idea. I know that South Africa and supposedly Israel have at least thought about developing it, but again, that's incredibly fucking stupid. And there are much easier ways to do this, right? Because it turns out that vaccines do not only protect for a particular disease, they also give protection to other diseases. For example, smallpox provides partial resistance to HIV and monkeypox infection. There's a whole thing about how HIV actually made the jump in 1900, and the decrease in vaccination for smallpox because of its eradication is actually what caused the HIV pandemic. We can't get into that, but yeah, uh, like it is very possible to have extremely high specificity bioweapons and like have it be non-suspicious, because it would just look like, well, most countries in the world don't give people the BCG vaccine for tuberculosis. Our country does, and ours is the only effective one. I'm speaking of the UK. So it's just a pure coincidence that everyone else is dead and we're not. So you could do it, and it's probably a lot better than a lot of people would suspect, and definitely better than ethnically specific bioweapons, which is like dumb. Anyways, so where do the plagues come from? Where does smallpox come from? Where does HIV come from? Where does the Black Death come from? They come from animals, right? These diseases involved in animals to infect them but not kill them, because you don't really want your host to die really quickly. Like something has gone wrong if your host is dead and you're a parasite and you killed your host. So they generally come from stuff like birds. The flu affects a large number of avians, and they like recombine in pigs and give us swine flu. SARS-CoV crossover in China, and like none of these diseases really have the traits you really want in order to threaten industrial civilization. Because in order to do that, you need to have all of these different traits, and the best comparison we have, the closest that a civilization has actually been destroyed by pathogens was the Columbian exchange, when all of the plagues of the old world hit the new world. The new world didn't really have comparable plagues for one, and for another, like they had zero resistance to it. And because of these wave after wave of deadly diseases hit these civilizations, you had fatality rates as high as 90% in many regions. And yeah, it was apocalyptic. If 90% of people died in the world today, it would destroy modern industrial civilization for sure. However, if everyone in the world lost their genetic and acquired immunity to all of those diseases that wiped out so much of the new world, and we randomly introduced, and we even if we had straight up bioterrorists running around introducing these diseases to random people, we would basically be fine, right? Because we wiped out every single one of these diseases with sanitation. We have epidemiology, and we can treat a lot of them. The Black Death has a death rate, I can't remember the exact figures, between like 95 and sorry, of like 2 and 5% when you're giving the patient like antibiotic treatment. And I think most of that.
Can I interject something here?
Go on.
Um, uh, Quite a few people talk about antibiotic resistance, and antibiotic resistance seems like the kind of thing that an adversary would be able to select for. and could potentially, people are really worried about accidentally making resistant, and you could imagine a very intelligent effort could find some exceedingly uh, uh, antibiotic resistant strains and release those.
It's interesting you mentioned that because even given that possibility, the vast majority, well, not the vast majority, yeah, I would say the vast majority of potentially civilization-wrecking pathogens are in fact viruses. As for the Black Plague, even if we didn't have antibiotics, we would largely still be fine due to everything else I mentioned. Better sanitation, better tracking. Like this stuff pops up in Madagascar like all the time. Occasionally people get infected with Yersinia pestis in Madagascar. That's pneumonic plague, black plague, and they never had large scale outbreaks because they were able to contain it at its source. It would be a lot harder if we didn't have antibiotics, but like it wouldn't be it, it wouldn't be impossible, definitely. But yeah, that would be somewhat dangerous. And also, there's all this stuff with like reserve antibiotics, emergency measures, the current antibiotic, patenting testing pipeline is screwed because like every time you make a new antibiotic, the FDA says no, you can't sell that because we need it just in case we have like an antibiotic resistant bacteria. So like no one develops them anymore. But there are still some that have like partial testing, whatever. I can't get into it. I'm sorry. Anyways, where was I? Okay. Yeah. So that's the worst thing that's ever happened. Like every single plague in existence that's ever existed, smallpox is gone. But even if we bring that back and add every other, lethal plague in history and hit everyone at the same time and try really hard, we wouldn't really threaten industrial civilization. Third world might be hit hard. My guess wouldn't even be that bad in like Bangladesh. So yeah, this is very, very hard stuff. Like trying to wipe out humanity with bioweapons is extremely hard with a resisting opponent. China in World War II was like under attack by Japan. It was in a state of total war with like strategic bombing, all of this crazy stuff going on with like you had like logistical lines being interdicted, the interior where the NRA was holding had like poor logistics, and that was why the Japanese couldn't push in. I'm not going to get into that. But yeah, my best guess is that if the Soviet Union had really tried to wipe out humanity, they couldn't have done it, and they wouldn't even and they would not even have gotten very far. So yeah, let's go on a case-by-case basis for the terrorism potential of existing pathogens. I just listed one of the most cited assessments of this exact thing. It was published in 2002 during the whole crazy anthrax, global war on terror period. And I made some slight edits, but overall, like category A, these are all the category A ones, the ones that they thought had the most potential for doing very bad things to humans. And you'll notice that out of three of them, only three can actually have human to human infections, transfers. Yeah. So like smallpox, number one, extinct, but also smallpox has like we have vaccines for it, and also it's actually very, very hard to spread from human to human because the active infection period is actually very obvious. Like most of the time, a person is infectious with smallpox, you can tell because they have like all these poxes on their face, and like that would be an immediate spotlight for the CDC and other groups to just come in and like try to contain this whole thing. The plague can be treated with antibiotics, and also it has very specific symptoms, and people with black buboes coming out of their necks are very conspicuous. So like the human to human spread potential is actually not even that high. Ebola, you need to basically lick corpses in order to get Ebola. I'm exaggerating, but not even by that much. It's like, yeah, it's in my opinion, it's not a big issue. The ones that have actually been used to kill people in the United States, and there's only been one, is anthrax. And that was probably by an actual anthrax researcher who worked on anthrax vaccines. So, and had access to anthrax in his lab. So it's like, bioterrorism is very, very hard. Anyways, here are the Bs. They didn't even list category Cs because they were basically like not a major threat. And the only ones in category B that have significant human to human spread potential are cholera, which can't spread if you have a basic sewer system, and dysentery. Same thing. And also, I think cholera can be, I think, treated with Gatorade. So there's that. Anyways, what do you need to actually threaten a civilization? Well, you need all these different traits. You have to be non-bacterial or antibiotic resistant, like heavily antibiotic resistant. And I don't think antibiotic resistant works in real life if you have emergency measures for antibiotic research. It has to spread covertly. It has to have long incubation time. It has to like it has to take a long time before symptoms start appearing. It has to be highly lethal. It has to have like hard or impossible to develop vaccine for it. It's just spread fast. Treatments can't work, and like having all of these factors together, is in my opinion basically impossible because like they are contradictory to work against each other so hard, and I will explain that later. And also, I think some people think that bioprotection equipment is a limiting factor for working with bioweapons, and that's just not true. Like bio safety level 1 and 2 is in some sense largely to protect the cultures from you as opposed to protect you from the bacteria or viruses you're working with. Because like I don't know if you've seen Contagion. Oh god, I can't get into that. The thing is, biocontainment level 2, you can buy stuff on eBay. No one even cares. It's basically glove, mask, and like smocks, and you can work with basically as dangerous of pathogens as you really want in that condition. The thing is, if you spill it and like it gets over your clothes, you might die. Like that's a trade-off. But if you're a terrorist, you probably don't care. Yeah, here. So the thing is, let's take a look at some cases of actual bioterrorism because it doesn't actually work. Here are three high-profile, well-funded groups that have actually tried to do bioterrorism. Let's go from the left. Crazy cult, Hindu Buddhist cult in Oregon. They like infected. They did like food poisoning, basically. Got 100 people sick. They're all fine. This is, I swear to you, the second biggest, most significant bioterrorism event in the history of the United States, if you don't count smallpox blankets. Okay. And then we have the 2001 anthrax letters. It was probably done by an actual anthrax researcher who I don't even know why he would do that. Like, but I guess he was bored and wanted to kill his ex-wife or something. All right. 5 dead. Anthrax researcher, ready access to anthrax. If he had like sent bombs or like just crashed a truck into somewhere, he could have gotten much further. Like the Unabomber had a much higher kill count. And then the third one is some crazy cult from Japan who like killed people with nerve gas in the Japanese subway. They tried to get Ebola. Turns out that's really hard and it didn't work. They tried to do anthrax. Turns out that's really hard and it didn't work. So like their kill count is 0. And my rule of thumb is that if your terrorism plots, like all cases of a particular type of terrorism has killed fewer people than a drunk driver has on accident, like you're not even a terrorist at that point, you're just LARPing. Anyways, so why haven't we seen a mega plague? Why doesn't bioterrorism actually work? Well, here's the thing. All these factors that we need at the same time in order to get a mega plague that's like really bad and kills a lot of people work against each other. So when a person is infected with a pathogen, they have a period of acute infection where the pathogen, starts replicating exponentially, but the body detects the pathogen and starts scaling up antibody production, also exponentially. If the pathogen wins and it just keeps replicating exponentially, the host dies. If the body wins, the pathogen is like, well, you stop being sick and, the body wins, I guess. So you have this acute period of high infectiousness, and you need a really high pathogen count. You need a lot of pathogens swirling around inside your system in order for stuff like air droplets and casual contact to spread the pathogen. right? You need a high count of pathogens in order to shed them in large enough amounts to infect people frequently. So an infection like that would trigger an immune response, which would make you obviously sick, right? So the diseases that actually can like infect people and for a long time and keep them sick, like they're very obvious, right? While so most people who are infectious with these chronic diseases, it's like they are obviously sick, and there's and like in order there are ways to hide like with shingles with tuberculosis hides in like these in human lung in the human lung and they make like these nodules out of scar tissue and that slowly kills you but like really it's very hard now stds are more infections are more local they're like infecting the local epithelium hpv basically has to have direct contact in order to infect someone. Now, this is due to the peculiarities of like how thin the membranes are in the genitals and stuff like that. But like, um, you need something extremely weird. You have to have really weird dynamics in order for disease to be able to spread covertly, not having any symptoms, for like there to be a high viral count for a really long time of years, and for the person to not show symptoms, and then like years later, right, to suddenly start killing people at very high rates. HIV is the only. Go on.
Yeah, I'm a bit confused about like the way these things work because the like in my model, like the herpes virus have some traits that make it very useful, and the HIV virus have some traits that make it COVID as well. And so the thing is, in my mind, it kind of seems like you could potentially combine these so you can have something that is as infectious as COVID and as lethal as HIV and can lay dormant like herpes and shingles. So, to what
Well,
extent could these be combined by an intelligent adversary?
1 second. Okay, so there is no such thing as COVID but 90% lethal because the hallmark of COVID was that it was difficult to detect because it had relatively few symptoms that could be confused for minor diseases. In a way, COVID was a minor disease, whatever, I'm not going to get into that. But like, in order for COVID to be 90% lethal, it can't look like COVID. It would have to look like SARS, right? Because you need mechanisms in order to cause the 90% fatality rate. Like you have to have large scale organ failure. Like you can't just sneeze a bit and then die in your sleep. Well, you definitely can, but like in order to have a high fatality rate, right, across a large section of the population in a relatively short period of time, you have to have symptoms, right?
Could you not imagine like a two-step process where like that's what's going on with HIV, right? That
Yeah.
like you have something that lays dormant for a long time and then suddenly
Mhm.
it kills you, like a timer that counts down or something like that. I don't actually
Yeah,
know
but
how.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, but like that's what makes HIV so dangerous, but it's the only one. HIV is the only one, and it's an STD, which means that it gets to skip some of these rules, and it's like really it has this crazy good thing at infiltrating the immune system. Like it has, but if it could spread through the air, right? That would imply a much higher viral count. So it would imply a full body infection with a greater mobilization of the immune system. It would no longer look like HIV. It would no longer be asymptomatic. It would look like someone who's like sick all the time, and they've had a fever for like 6 months, and stuff like that is very obvious and like easier to keep track of, right? Like in order to have, there's always trade-offs. You can't like have everything at the same time. I mean, you could probably engineer something you could probably be very clever and engineer something like that, but like in the real world, people have tried and they haven't gone very far.
So my model is like the opposite end of a spectrum. Um, I am thinking something like rhinovirus. I think is the kind of virus that spreads exceedingly easily, or maybe rotavirus or something
Mhm.
that where it seems like you don't actually have to have very strong symptoms in order for it to spread to other people.
Yeah,
I've
yeah, I
heard
know.
that you're actually more. infectious before you get symptoms. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Well, I'm not 100% sure about that, but like, there's also some stuff with rhinoviruses specifically due to they've like co-evolved and with human beings for a really long time, I believe. But like, then how do you get them consistently lethal? It's like, in order for us to be consistent, like in theory, you could have something that's like consistently lethal, but like it's but we're basically just talking about HIV again, and there's only like HIV, the
So
one disease. Yeah.
one thing that I've been kind of confused about is that it kind of feels like this whole conversation is assuming no AGI, maybe, or no like very
Uh,
advanced
yeah,
biotech
it's like
capabilities.
I'm
Is that
actually
correct?
I will address that later, but what I'm saying is it's with current levels of AI and like research and like terrorist group
Sure.
capability,
Okay. Fair enough.
things are basically non-dangerous, except for my one
Mhm.
very special case in which we are utterly screwed with current level
Okay.
capabilities. Okay.
Yeah,
What do
that
you mean?
seems like yeah. So let's just get on to that, I guess.
Okay. All right. Yeah, there's like an apocryphal argument. We can't get into that. Counterpoints to a resilient world. Amazonian tribes, but like there's a surface to area ratio. Like most people in the United States don't really encounter someone who's recently come from a different country. So it's like there's like these layers of shielding. So you can actually do track and trace, like control stuff like Ebola or Yersinia pestis or measles. Like you can do stuff like that in real life, and in real life, those diseases don't get very far in the United States. So there's that. But counterpoint, COVID happened. I make the argument that a 90% lethal COVID wouldn't look like COVID, but like if it could, lockdowns will be enforced much stringently, and people will voluntarily stay home. There's the point that in 1910 we couldn't have done all of that, and we would be utterly screwed. Uh, and it's very lucky we didn't. Well, it's not because, well, whatever. We can't get into that. Airborne HIV 2 still kills everyone. Not really in real life today. Like we have really good treatments for HIV, and we have like vaccines in the pipeline. But and like yeah. In theory, I guess if a disease had those traits, like the Soviet Union or bioterrorists could like release it into the world, I guess, but they wouldn't like they guess they can engineer it to be slightly more dangerous, but most of the risk would come from the existing model, not from modifications they can make onto it. And also, airborne HIV is no longer looks like HIV. It will look like something else completely different. It would have different symptoms because like you can't have airborne spread with a low viral count that you typically see in HIV. Okay, here's a picture of a deer. Light summary, biowarfare has to start from existing pathogens, right? Terrorist groups have tried really hard, and nation states have tried really hard to kill lots of civilians with biowarfare, but they haven't gotten very far. Terrorists don't have a good track record with this. It's unlikely they'll do it just happen to get cutting edge genetic engineering capabilities over the next 5, 10, 20 years. How long do you think it takes to get to AGI? So yeah, but there's some bad arguments for why we're safe. Human genetic diversity. I've read someone on Twitter make the argument that in an AI created plague couldn't kill everyone because of human genetic diversity. For example, like I don't know, 10% of Europeans have genetic resistance to HIV. There's something whatever. We can't get into it. But this is just pure happenstance because for HIV 2, very, very few people are immune. I think it's like less than 1%. So, that's still really bad if 99% of people die. And yeah, you get genetic variation, but, there are existing diseases that can get everyone if I'm not going to get into it. But yeah, back to the deer. So there is this disease called chronic wasting disease, and it is a prime disease that appears in deer, and they shed these particles everywhere. So what is chronic wasting disease? It's a relatively recent disease, originated in the 1960s, didn't really become very common until like the year 2000. It's a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy, transmissible, obvious. Spongiform, their brains look like sponges because they're full of holes. Encephalopathy, disease of the brain, like mad cow disease or scabies or Kuru. Transmissible prion diseases have, relatively little research because until CWD, they required cannibalism of specifically neurotissue in order to spread. And most Americans aren't cannibals. Most people in the world aren't cannibals. And in order to stop mad cow disease, you just have to not eat cow brains or feed them, or feed cows cow brains. So yeah, the disease vector is a self-replicating protein. They're like these weirdly shaped proteins that if they come in contact with like a normal protein, they'll cause the normal protein to misfold. When symptoms appear, your brain is already full of holes. You're going to die at that point, probably within a year. Now, chronic wasting disease, like unlike the other prion diseases, spreads through casual contact. If a deer comes and eats a plant, its saliva will leave CWD prions on the plant, which can stay for years. And another deer comes, it eats the plant, it gets infected. Right? They've had like this is really really bad. This is the type of trait you will want in disease that you engineer to wipe out humans. So incubation period generally under a year. Occasionally can be longer. The months is generally where it's at. Hosts are infectious. Like they are actively spreading like these particles into their environment onto other deer, and deer do groom each other. The main spread is how fast deer can move. Deer generally don't travel that far, but people bring deer from state to state and from country to country for whatever reasons. And yeah, this is in Europe, and now it's in Asia. It might be in Africa. It's bad. They tested a vaccine for this, but it turns out vaccines don't actually work against prion diseases. They actually accelerated disease progression. I think I read some theories. This has been years ago. I'm not sure about it. Where it's like full body immune responses causes the brain blood barrier to like kind of loosen a little bit because of the inflammation, and prion actually gets to the brain easier. Fortunately, disease only infects deer, like cervid, deer, moose, reindeer. Is it a threat to humans? We don't know, right? The problem we don't know is because we are stupid. There is a paper published, I think, a couple years ago, where they say maybe this person got CWD from deer, but like they didn't do the expensive, complicated proteomics analysis they would need to identify if it was spontaneous CJD or if it actually came from a deer. But like you have these two people, they're friends, they like both ate sussy deer, and then they got they either were extremely unlucky and both spontaneously got spontaneous prion diseases, which are literally 1 in a million, at the same time, more or less at the same time, and then died, or CWD can affect people. But because we don't actually care about this, we don't know because they didn't do the analysis. They can infect monkeys in laboratory conditions. We don't know how to modify these prions to infect humans, but I'll get into that. Anyways, this is yeah. We don't know what would happen if it like a lot of humans actually got infected with this. Would it be able to spread from human to human? Because no one's done the research. So yeah, here is a graph. As you might notice, the territory up to 2000 was really small. And over the last 20 years, it's been spreading massively throughout the United States and Canada. This is really, really bad. So I did some Fermi calculations because I hate myself. And I'm trying to, I want to get into quant work, and this seems fun. So, okay. Anyways, we don't, like I mentioned, we don't actually test brains that look spongy for CWD specifically. They just do a generalized prion test. So what would it actually take for us to catch this disease early? So CJD, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, spontaneously appears in 1 out of 1 million people every single year, and then you die horrifically within roughly a year. So what happens when a mortician opens up a brain and sees spongiform brain? Well, they will probably just assume it's CJD. So it's like, okay, 0.1% of the US population dies every month. So how many people would have to progress to the point of spongiform, of brain sponge, and then like die in accidents to the point that like people start raising an eyebrow. And yeah, if you do the math, it's like, well, there's only a couple hundred people in the United States who succeeded at the same time. But if you assume 10% fast progression, you might need like up to 10,000 people like who've had the disease for like 6 months or however long it takes for a fast progressing patient to develop a spongiform brain. So the thing is, by the time you get to that point, you've been infectious for months. Oh, by the way, this was the study I talked about, where they say, yeah, this might be the case, but we didn't check. More formal calculations. Infections are exponential, depending on how fast you assume that the disease spreads. Um, it could be millions before the first fast progressing patient has died of chronic wasting disease. I'm not entirely sure about the 100% year figure. I probably should have double checked. We could invest a lot more in research once the alarm has been sounded, but we don't have an obvious path forward. These are the normal things we do to control the spread of diseases is vaccines and lockdowns and tracking and tracing people. But like, um, we can't, as far as we know, we can't actually develop a vaccine for this. So it's just going to be lockdowns entirely. And we're not even sure that would even work because it could be animal reservoirs. It could be that it's more infectious than CWD, and like people who are infected actually actively shed into the environment, and people get infected even through lockdowns. I mean, I live in China, right? We had incredibly draconian lockdown, and people still occasionally got infected, and it wasn't like an occasional thing. It happened like with fairly regular. It was a fairly regular thing that like people somewhere got infected, and like I can't go out of my house anymore, and that continued for years, right? And that's just with COVID. So let's take a look at a case where we had like a mystery disease and see how long it took people to really to catch on that, oh, here's this crazy mystery disease with all these crazy symptoms that never appear anywhere else. And how long did it take for people to notice that this was incredibly bad and was going to kill millions of people? Well, the first deaths in the United States happened in the 1960s. People just mostly didn't care. They thought it was a medical curiosity that all these young people were dying of like rare cancers and rare infections. And it really took until like the early 1980s when it started massively spreading in the United States and it hit really high infection numbers for people to even take notice. Like it wasn't until we had large scale symptoms that people really rang the alarm bell. And this is really, really bad. But yeah, for Spanish flu, let's look at the other naturally occurring diseases and how we would fare today. Spanish flu was just a really deadly flu variant at the time. We actually are really good at making flu vaccines on short notice, so like this isn't a huge threat. Tuberculosis, most of these infections are asymptomatic. Antibiotics are good for it. You can take a chest X-ray, and like if it's causing symptoms, it's going to show up on an X-ray. And cholera, we have sewers. That's good enough to stop it. So why am I even bringing AI into all of this? Well, right now, prions are really mysterious. Like we don't know the exact dynamics. We have some ideas, but there's so much mystery there. But prions are just normal proteins. They're normal amino acid chains. The amino acid chain for prions is the same as a normally folded proteins. It's just folded in a really different way. And by different, but I'll get into that later. So an AI that's really good at understanding prion structure, as good as understanding that as AlphaFold is at understanding conventional proteins, will probably be able to like look at different prion structures and say, and like tell you how infectious things are, or you can run a classifier or whatever on them. But yeah, if you get really, really good at understanding prion proteins and how their structures impact like infectiousness, you would probably be able to design prions, and that would be that. So my threat model was never AI can modify existing prions, but more it can understand prions well enough to like make prions with specific traits that you want. So CWD is really just a lower bound for how bad a prion disease can be because it actually exists in real life, it just doesn't affect humans. There's no obvious reason why we can't have a variant that infects humans and behaves the same way in humans as CWD it does in deer. It could actually be a lot worse. If it can, I'm not sure if plants have a prion analog, and it wouldn't. If they did, it wouldn't need to kill the plants. It would just need to like, be present in the plants, and it would affect a huge amount of people. And if it could do that, it might wipe out multicellular life. Who knows? So yeah, it's really bad. It's really bad. And okay, so let's be more specific.
Sorry,
I
hang on.
don't
What
think
was it about wiping out multicellular life?
that was mostly a joke, but like I'm also kind of serious because if you have a prion that can infect plants and infect animals and it can infect bacteria, like it's going to get absolutely everywhere and it's going to kill everything.
Okay.
Yeah, but as far as I know, like it almost certainly doesn't infect. As far as I know, you can't make a prion that infects everything. You might be able to make a prion that infects bacteria and about plants and animals, but probably not kill the plants. Which, yeah, it probably can't wipe out multicellular life, but like, I would be surprised if it can, but like whether I'm surprised or not at that point really doesn't matter. So yeah, let's be more specific. Prion proteins are incredibly stable. Normal proteins start denaturing and losing their structure at like 40, 50 degrees Celsius. You can put prions in an autoclave at 120 degrees with pressurized steam and it will still like maintain their original structure. Okay, you can't just cook them to death like that. So my prediction is that it takes zero machine learning breakthroughs to get really, really good prion protein structure prediction software. Like I think you just need to train AlphaFold differently and focus specifically on prion proteins and get some feedback and maybe some lab tests, and that's all you really need. So yeah, that's a problem. And also we know that in humans there are certain diseases like Alzheimer's where like where you get like prion where you get like misfolded proteins systematically. It's like you have all these different people, and once they reach a certain age, there are these changes in the brain, and these changes consistently cause the formation of misfolded proteins. So it's like you can probably systematically make make prions by by like altering the dynamics within living cells. So my guess is that you can probably get like an mRNA sequence injected into cells and like have prions that spontaneously form. There's like, and obviously the prions that like can replicate more are selected for, and who knows? But this is like, I generally don't like bring this specific point up because it sounds way too much like COVID vaccine conspiracy theories, and that's polluted a lot of my search results. So yeah.
So
Um,
I have a general question because I don't know very much about prions. But one
Okay.
thing that I do know a bit more about is Conway's Game of Life. I don't know to what extent you're familiar with
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I
But
am familiar with
this
it.
Conway's Game of Life, like I played a bit with it when I was a child, and then it turned out that people who are really smarter than me can make things like a gun that projects
Yeah, yeah.
out gliders, and you could
Uh-huh.
imagine something that projects out a glider, and then when it hits a structure that is kind of like a protein in the human brain, then what happens is that this particular structure it starts to become like a gun and emit more of these kind of gliders or something like that. Is that a
Yeah.
decent analogy for how prions work?
It's like um no, it's like more like polymers. So it's like a polymer is formed when you have like these chunks, right? And then they can start spontaneously forming chains. So normally you have these proteins that are wandering around in the body and wandering around in cells, and doing their specific function, but then a chain of prion polymers, like this fiber, touches it, and then it lengthens the chain, converts that particular normally folded protein into a differently folded protein, and then the chains break off, and like essentially it's like replication.
Um,
Hmm.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
So first off, um, is there enough data on prions for AlphaFold-like methods to actually, get good at predicting how prions will
Uh,
fold? Sorry, at how proteins would fold into prions?
Wait, sorry, I think I'm having a problem with my links because it's just like, yeah, I don't, that's weird. Okay.
Well, I suppose you could, like a bad actor, could literally find a deer that is dying from chronic wasting disease.
Oh no, no, I posted it in the chat. Yeah, it's like the deer thing isn't like galaxy brain because like hunters will literally kill deer and then drag them to like a station or just with their buddies, and then they'll gut the deer. They'll like have all these awful the brains, the guts, the stuff, and the bones, and then they'll just leave it out for wild animals. So like if you went up and got a deer brain and said, "Hey, this looks like a cool brain. Can I keep it?" My guess is they'll say yes, and they won't even remember it the next day.
Yeah, and so it seems like if you have uh, like you have something like AlphaFold, and then you also say, okay, here is some neural matter, and here is the prion, and this prion it causes this neural matter to malform in this particular way. Then you can say, okay, if you can understand that to a reasonable degree, then you can say, okay, now it's not deer brain but human brain. I don't know how different are human brains and deer brains. It's not obviously very different.
It's not about the brain structure. It's about the proteins. Like these things, the CWD can infect monkey brains because their proteins are shaped more like deer. For the parts that matter for CWD infection, they're shaped more like deer than they are like humans. But certain mouse brains can't be infected because like they just aren't compatible for now.
Right. So I'm not sure what your link was meant to prove, because I'm not familiar enough with the literature to understand the terms.
I'm
Is that
saying that
basically
they're
just
I'm saying that they're working really hard on this problem and they're publishing their results. So like they're
okay? So you
trying.
think, all right? So you think it's plausible that there might not be enough data now, say, but that doesn't mean that we can't have like some kind of breakthrough in protein modeling in
Um,
order to let
like
them.
I think in a sense we have all the data we need to like get good at this, but
Well, I mean, data using current. Probably an ASI could just figure this out very easily, but like I'm talking about AlphaFold 5 or whatever.
yeah. I mean my model on this isn't very strong because this isn't my specialty, but like it's plausible. It's plausible.
Okay, cool. Um, the second question I had was that you said that the prions replicate through some sort of unknown mechanism, like somehow they manage to make other proteins fall down into a lower energy state like themselves.
Um
But like if we
are
don't
any
know that,
oh
sorry, go
sorry, go
ahead.
on. Oh, are
I was
any of you
gonna
guys chemists?
No.
Okay.
no, I was trained in
Then
physics, not chemistry.
okay. Then go on.
Um, oh, I think Simon has a
Oh,
question.
right, okay. Simon, go ahead.
Yes. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was just gonna say a little bit of a different piece. But I heard you say earlier that two humans may have gotten infected
Mm-hmm.
with the CWD, and so I was just curious, like, okay, if two humans got infected, assuming they actually did get infected with it,
Mm-hmm.
then it seems probable that it would have just continued to spread from there, assuming they were in contact with other people. Like,
Yeah, that is a risk, and no one cares enough to look into it.
Wait, I
And
thought this
also,
you had to do this by like eating the brain matter of the thing that's infected. So I would have assumed that they had eaten, I don't know, some like infected deer or whatever,
Oh no,
and the
no,
prion
you don't.
was just the right.
No, it's like for deer, like mad cow disease, that's kind of true. But for chronic wasting disease, like it's everywhere. It's everywhere in the body, and like they're shedding the protein, the prion
Ooh,
protein
okay.
constantly into the environment. So yeah, if that happens, and if that's true for people, actually, okay, I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys. That I've kind of been bullshitting a little bit. The specific article about whether or not those two people were infected is paywalled and it's not on Sci-Hub, so I haven't had the chance to look at it. Its exact contents. I'm basing everything off of their abstract. So yeah, sorry.
mhm. Yeah. I guess one other thing is just like, and I don't necessarily expect you to be able to answer this,
Hmm.
but just like if there were two documented infections that if we just say if we assume they happened, then why wouldn't I would expect then that a lot more infections might also be occurring given that CWD is happening. I mean, it is has infected deer like all
Yeah.
across the U.S., Canada, and other parts of the world as well.
Well,
Um,
there's a couple of things. First of all, it is like their model is that these people were infected like 9 years before they died, and CWD normally kills deer in like uh, under a year. Not quite, but like basically in that range, in that time bracket. So 9 years is a lot longer than 1 year. So presumably disease progression is a lot slower in humans, and also like a lot of the exposure risk is relatively recent. So maybe, and also there's very important point number two. Prions can kind of sort of mutate, like the exact structure of the prion protein changes slightly over time, and you get different properties. I think like a major reason why it became more infectious over the past couple of decades is because of like weird protein evolutionary dynamics, which is insane to say.
Yeah, that was another thing I was gonna ask. I was a little bit curious. Like, it sounds like yeah, they can kind of evolve in some manners or something. I'd be curious to learn more about that at some point.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like I did 30 hours of research for this, and I feel like, I should have done like 50 hours more.
Um, so I guess one thing I'm a bit confused by regarding the human cases of chronic
Mhm.
wasting disease is that like surely the fact that they got infected, but we don't see a prion pandemic right now is some evidence that either it is takes a very, very long time to replicate, or it just can't really replicate.
Well, I mean, in humans, a lot of Lyme diseases do take a long time. Like if you look at Kuru, which is in Papua New Guinea cannibalism related, when they banned cannibalism, there were still people dying of Kuru like 50 years later. Um, I think the median incubation period is like 5 to 10 years. So, and also like 9 years before 2019 is 2010, and there was just way less
Okay, so
exposure.
I guess it kind of sounds like you're saying that it's entirely possible that um, there's like an exponentially growing population of people in the US who are infected by chronic wasting disease, and that
I mean, I
like
hope not.
the bell will toll in a between a few years to a few decades. But like
I well, I mean, I hope not. But like,
right, but
it's
there's no strong evidence we have to rule that out.
yeah, you can see why I'm like a little bit freaked out.
Okay, that is pretty freaky. Um, doesn't that imply then that like you want a lot more protein folding research in order to figure out
Yeah.
how
Oh yeah.
to
No. That is definitely my
unscrew this?
point. Yes, I make the point later that you need more protein research because like otherwise we have this massive unpatched vulnerability in like humans and we don't even know where to start with patching it. And I actually do believe we need to vastly like Google DeepMind needs to look at this and possibly massively invest their massively increase their investment in specifically prion folding research,
I mean,
because
have you
this
thought
is
of writing a paper on this? It seems like the kind of thing that you probably could publish a paper about. I don't know if that's true, but that
I
would make it
mean,
more legible to
yeah, like
academics.
number one, I don't have a degree in this, although I am a published epidemiologist. That's
Yeah,
number one. Number two, I think the best way forward is like I make a post, I email some prion researchers. Like there are people who are researching this exact issue, and I'll just ask for their opinion on all of this. Like maybe they'll just say no, 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 it's fine, or maybe they'll tell me that they're in a constant state of panic shitting terror. Who knows? But yeah, like I
okay.
definitely want to pursue this further.
All right. Thank you for doing that. Um, but there was a branch of the conversation which we kind of left, which I wanted to get a little bit back to, which was regarding the prions replicating. You
Mm-hmm.
said that the mechanism by which the prions cause other proteins to turn into prions is unknown. If that's the case, like
It's
how are
it's
we
kind of no. It's like they come in direct physical contact, and then conversion happens.
right? But then, like, if that's the case, how are we actually going to figure out? Like, how can you train an AI system to figure out how to create such a system if, like, we don't know the mechanism, and
Well,
presumably we don't have tons of data on protein-protein interactions? Like, I thought that AlphaFold isn't really doing the protein-protein interactions yet.
Well, I mean, it's doing it implicitly for large proteins. So, like, there's all of these like the tertiary and quaternary interactions are basically protein to protein. So it's like, um, once again, this is not where I did most of my research, so I can't give you a clear answer. But yeah, I honestly don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay, fair enough.
So
I'm kind of
th-
like, I hope that is a reason to think that maybe this doesn't happen, but I have no idea.
so I have a
Now the
question.
real okay, go on.
So my question would be like if you post publicly and saying, "Hey, this seems like something that could be dangerous," then there's an info hazard in that, right? Like,
I disagree.
do tell. Why do you disagree? Like, does the
Okay,
old
because like
yeah, go?
because all of the danger comes specifically from one company, DeepMind, and one research team, AlphaFold. So it's like, and also like the basic level of action they need to take regarding this is just not publish specifically prion related research. Like that's one very small step, and the other part of it is like do a lot more actual prion research. So it's like if you were a researcher at DeepMind, you would be incentivized to like take this seriously because you get more funding. But like it doesn't take a huge amount of action for them to like completely fix this, and also like if they fix it, people aren't going to be able to use it and do bad stuff.
Why are they not able to do that? Assume that someone proves that hey, AlphaFold can actually you do some kind of small tweak to AlphaFold, and then it can in fact fold primes, and you can like use that to understand primes. If this becomes public knowledge, then bad actors won't be able to use the precise techniques that AlphaFold are using because those are kept secret. But just the knowledge that this is a thing that can be done would probably be enough to
Yeah.
trigger it.
The Galaxy Brain answer is, well, you would need to train a cutting edge AI model in order to do that, and you can't really do that if you're a terrorist.
But
But yeah,
I
but the
mean,
real answer, the real
you
answer
could be
is,
like a YOLO open source fanatic or something and just decide to train a
oh
system
yeah,
that
yeah,
can do this or
it
more anyway.
it
And
yeah,
could,
then,
but
like,
like, yeah, no, I'm going to acknowledge, I'm going to acknowledge this as a real risk. If any of you guys know people at DeepMind, I guess you can ask them.
Well,
Um,
I think it's very reasonable, like on balance, the fact that DeepMind seem to be like still publishing this on protein folding seems to imply very strongly that they do not believe that there's any kind of risk with this, basically.
Or
Um,
maybe they don't know the risk. I mean, I've spoken to protein folding researchers, and I brought this up, and they were surprised.
yeah, but you would kind of expect that if uh like it makes sense to like just with like software vulnerabilities to write to
um,
DeepMind, say, hey, please stop publishing this, and if they don't, stop actually publishing this, then you go public and say, hey, just like with software vulnerabilities where you say, okay, we've told the software vendor that they have this bug and they didn't patch it, so now we're telling everybody about this problem. I don't know if that's actually a thing that works.
Listen, like I'm a real person in meat space. Like a lot of, I don't really know how to do a lot of this.
Hmm. Fair. I don't know either. So, but I guess just talking to someone from DeepMind, at least here, do they have? Yeah, I don't know how to do that either. I think DeepMind is like
Yeah,
very good.
I know who I need to talk to in order to do that. I don't want to, but I don't do it.
Yeah, I think just
Oh,
a tiny bit, like a small bit of information. Maybe just say, hey, I'm thinking of posting this to um, to less wrong. Do you like have very strong reasons why I should not post this? Would probably be sufficient.
okay.
um,
Thanks.
Because if the FBI is telling DeepMind to actually, take this very seriously, and DeepMind is in fact taking it seriously, then they would tell you, please don't publish this. We are already aware of the problem and doing everything we can. But the fact that they are publishing adjacent research seems to imply that they are totally dropping the ball. And in that case, you know, making people aware that they're dropping the ball seems like the correct move.
Okay, Ali.
I was going to say something like I could maybe talk to some people in DeepMind if you really don't want to talk to whoever this contact is. But I don't know if they know anyone in the who's working on the AlphaFold part of things. Like the guys I know are mostly working in the robotics part of things.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, you can just ask them about it. If it's like common lunchroom conversation, then I would be a lot less freaked out.
As in, like, prions as a potential virus.
No, just like
Risk.
people are aware of it as a general like risk model. Like, if I were working on AlphaFold, like, and I knew about this, it would just be like, oh, the bad,
Sure,
dangerous thing that can happen if we
sure,
do
I
something
agree.
stupid.
But what I was trying to get at is that the people I know in DeepMind, I don't think they're working on AlphaFold.
No, I mean that's fine. Like, I'm not sure like that my contacts can get through to DeepMind people either.
Okay.
The obvious thing would be to send them a link to this video, perhaps that will explain some things with a like find a good timestamp and say, hey, this seems like okay. So one obvious thing we could do is to make the timestamp here. Like, why? So we have this kind of thing where AlphaFold is currently publishing some research that seems like it could be um, misused in some sense to create prions that are able to make chronic wasting disease move from deer to humans. And
Uh,
that seems like a really bad thing. And why are DeepMind still publishing this kind of research? Shouldn't they stop doing that?
um, yeah. Oh, are you asking me to give the arguments right now?
Yeah, like, can you imagine that we are sending this timestamp to someone from
Mhm.
DeepMind, and we are like, what would we like concisely say to that person in DeepMind to convince? Yeah, what would you say to someone from DeepMind?
Okay. Well, conventional bioterrorism attacks and state sponsored biowarfare programs require an incredibly large number of people working in cooperation and a large amount of like difficult to communicate experts knowledge and techniques and like a huge supply chain of contractors and suppliers in order to do basic genetic engineering. You know, in real life, a bioterrorist can't actually genetically engineer a virus to be significantly more dangerous as a tool of bioterrorism. In addition, like bioterrorism in general is just not very effective. People have tried it a lot and spent a lot of money and time on it, and it hasn't gotten anywhere. So here's the thing, though. Instead of needing a huge set of very complex skills, you just if you want to do bioterrorism with prion diseases, you would need one very specific skill that's like DeepMind. DeepMind AlphaFold is that their team is working very hard to pursue, which is getting very good at predicting prion protein structure and understanding like how it interacts with normal proteins. And the thing is, we know at the bottom limit for how bad things can get because there is a disease called chronic wasting disease in deer, which is a prion disease, which has all the worst possible traits. Where if you took this disease and had a human analog with the same traits, we would be fucked. We would be fucked, and we wouldn't know how to unfuck ourselves because vaccines don't work. They've tried deer vaccines for chronic wasting disease. They don't work. They accelerate the course of the disease, right? Like we haven't been able to control the spread of chronic wasting disease in deer who like don't migrate that far in their lives, and humans take airliners and move all over the place, and also we've moved the deer all over the place. But that's not the point. The point is like it is you have a disease where it can incubate for months, maybe a year, maybe longer, and it spreads incredibly fast. Well, it's incredibly infectious for a prion disease. Mad cow disease requires cannibalism. Kuru requires cannibalism. Scabies, I think, spreads slightly easier, but mostly requires cannibalism, right? These are very easy to control, so people didn't take prion diseases very seriously. For chronic wasting disease, it spreads in a way like, I don't know, the flu, right? You just need contact, a deer eating a plant that has CWD, and then another deer comes and licks the plant, or the deer lick each other, and the infected deer infects the uninfected deer. Like it can spread casually, which is insane. And if something like this appeared in humans, we would be screwed. Okay, so my next point is, if AlphaFold gets really, really good at understanding the structure of prion proteins, you could potentially, use the model and use DeepMind's AlphaFold published research regarding this specific issue to potentially design prions and potentially find ways to make those prions from like relatively easy, like maybe use like mRNA to like change certain mechanisms within a cell and like have prions spontaneous not have prions appear in that cell. And we know this, like you can systematically have prions appear in a cell because you have diseases like Alzheimer's where misfolded proteins like consistently appear in a particular manner because of like a particular shift in conditions, right? Like we know these things are possible, and we put all of them together, we have the potential that if number one, DeepMind AlphaFold, their team keeps publishing the sort of research and keeps training their models, and like God forbid they make it open source. Keep training the models on prions, and God forbid they make it open source. Someone can potentially use it to make a bioweapon without like all the other skills you would need, because you wouldn't even be necessarily be messing around with cells. A lot of this research can just be done with like proteins, right? Because it's a much lower level of complexity. You definitely need cells for a lot of testing, and a lot of it has to do with specific cellular conditions. The point I'm trying to make is that it is way easier to make a really, really dangerous bioweapon with prions than it is with basically anything else. With anything else, if you try really hard to do genetic engineering, you probably can't get very far, right? Even if the state sponsor, you can't get very far because it in real life, diseases like smallpox, if you put it in somewhere like the United States, and we get this all the time, we get diseases like, Black Death, measles, they come to, they like are brought into the United States, and maybe they infect a few people, and then it stops, right? In real life, we can stop these genetically engineered diseases probably. So that's like an outdated threat model. Instead, we have this massive threat model where if we get CWD, but for humans, we are screwed. We can't contain it. We don't know what to do. And that is the gist of my argument.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, and okay, and one last thing. I'm not asking them to stop doing prion research. I think because of this, they need to do way, way more prion research. They just should not, number one, not open source that specific part of AlphaFold. And number two, they should like not publish specifically prion folding related research, or at least like maybe include a few less details. But like you should do more research and just publish a little bit less. And I think just by doing that, you can take away the considerable majority of risk. And also, I think there's a non-zero risk of like, sustained crossover where CWD can spontaneously cross into humans and just in such a way that humans can infect each other. And I find that really disturbing, and they should do more research.
I'm thinking one thing that DeepMind should also do is if they are doing more research on prions and they discover that yeah, sure, it looks like a different version of AlphaFold can in fact figure out how to fold prions, then they need to contact who do they contact? The FBI, NSA,
CDC,
CDC,
CDC.
CDC. If
Yeah.
they figure out, hey, you can actually we have found a way to do this. Um, yeah. What do you think the CDC would do if you come to them and say, hey, we've will they shut down DeepMind? Will they uh, give all the
They
resources?
don't, they don't exactly have the authority to shut down DeepMind. Like, it, they need to do more like they need to put a lot more money into like CWD research because like it's really underfunded compared to like the particular threat it takes. You need to like probably need a better database of like transmissible spongiform diseases because the one of the quote unquote warning signs of like a large scale human infection is an up spike and what looks like CJD. So it's like you need to pay attention to this stuff and you need to invest in testing because like I looked at a paper and they said, well, geez, we didn't do the really complicated protein analysis to determine if this is actually a CWD or just spontaneous CJD. And like they just didn't test when, it's like obviously the most dangerous, like it's the most important test possibly in the most important disease test in possibly the entire history of the world. And they just didn't do it. So, yeah, I think they should get more funding.
By the way, is this a like extinction level threat model? Is it like what kind of overall danger are you thinking?
Dude, I don't like. Okay, maybe it's an extinction level threat. Like it's entirely possible. Like it's an extinction level threat for deer. That's for sure. Like it's, well, okay, I wouldn't say extinction level, but it's very very bad for deer, right? But then deer don't get on airliners and like fly across the country. I mean they do because people do that for them, right? And that's how they got to Europe and South Korea. But like, it could be very bad. Mike, if I had to bet money, I would say it doesn't kill everyone for obvious reasons, but it could get bad. Like if it kills 10% of people, it would be incredibly bad.
Okay, but like, do you expect, I don't know, 10% level
I don't
casualties?
see. My uncertainty is so high that like if this actually happens, I don't know. Like the most likely scenario is for like CJD spreads to humans. I'm making air quote hands here. You can't see it, but the most likely scenario is that it doesn't spread any further, right? You can only like it's only good enough to like kill you, but in order to spread further, it would need to like someone would need to eat your brain. Like that's the most likely scenario. Like, but maybe that's not how it works. Maybe people have already there already has been human to human transmission cases. I don't know. So yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna say, so I'm just like messaging a well-connected friend in
Okay.
the
Thanks.
safety space about this, asking him if he knows if he has any contacts in DeepMind to work on AlphaFold. And I'm
Okay.
just shaping the message. So I'm going to say maybe, but probably not extinction of effect.
Yeah, like my intuition again, because I use my intuition from Conway's Game of Life, is that like you can get like some of these structures that like move in Conway's Game of Life, spaceships and shoot things and something like that. And if you are smarter, then you can often get something that is dramatically smaller, that can attach to way more surfaces. That depending on how well you understand it, then the search space is just so massive that you can potentially
Um,
get something that is, you know, much better. It doesn't just hit brains, but hit like literally every human cell or something like that if you're smart enough. That would be my intuition. Is that
yeah,
a
maybe.
reasonable thing?
I don't know. This is like pretty far beyond my expertise for one, and for another. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. It was actually really important. Give me a second. What were you saying before that?
Yeah. So in like my understanding is that the space of all proteins, of the space of all possible proteins, is very large and probably
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah. I understand. Um, no, let me repeat that. It's outside my expertise for one, and for another, it's just prions are like a very specific configuration, and if you look over the space of like it's very distinct. Like you definitely know if like a protein is misfolded in a prion-like way as opposed to a normal way. So it's like it's very easy to like differentiate the two. The trick might be like which ones actually self-replicate, because I would assume that would be the harder part. Like maybe, proteins misfold into prions all the time, but they don't self-replicate. Like, oh, and the analogy I wanted to make was, so I saw a video on YouTube the other day about AZT. Did you see that video about like these specific chemical, like specific crystalline state of AZT and how like it caused AZT to be like unusable for a few months?
so. We watched very different YouTube videos. Could you remind me what ACT is?
It's an HIV medication. So in biochemistry, there is oftentimes a problem where you want a specific configuration of a compound or of a molecule, right? Like there are different crystalline structures. Like there's like for water, H2O, you can form different types of crystals under different types of conditions. And with carbon, you can make diamonds and graphene, stuff like that. So for AZT, it turns out that like the form they were using for medication was like this weird gel-like compound that like was you had to do a specific method in order to like get in order to form those type of like amorphous crystals. And then suddenly one day at one of their manufacturing sites, the crystals like just became entirely insoluble in water. It just became like an actual like hard crystal or whatever. And like because it was insoluble, it was really like I can't remember the exact details, but like they couldn't administer it in the way they used to. You can't just drink it. You can't just take a soft gel. You have to actually drink it, and apparently it tasted really bad. And like they had to revise the entire process. But it turns out that got someone from Italy to look at their plant in America to figure out how the hell this happened. And when the guy from Italy returned to Italy, the Italy plant started having the same problems. And this is a fairly common thing that happens in biochemistry because like their hypothesis was that this guy had like a microscopic crystal like that he took with him back to Italy. And because it was more slightly lower energy state, right? It was slightly lower energy. It would like once a very small amount of that got into the facility, into one of the bioreactors. Oh, well, no, it wasn't bioreactor. It was like the chemical reaction, I forgot, containers. Like every batch made after that became like the less useful crystalline form because, it's a lot easier to, because it was a preferred lower energy state, So I think that's basically what's going on with prions, like something similar. It's like a lower energy state that that is preferred. And if you come in contact with it, like the it just it, the polymer expands and like it converts more of it, more proteins to itself, something like that. Do you roughly get what I'm going with?
It sounds like the physics things called like a false vacuum. Ali, if you have a background in physics, you may know more about this. But I've heard the idea that you can have like a low energy state that is much lower than the
Yeah.
vacuum in theory, and if that is ever created anywhere in the universe, it will like convert the entire universe into this new lower energy state, and everything literally in the universe will be destroyed. It's like a very speculative thing, but you know,
I mean, as far as I'm aware, it's like a thing that is entirely permitted within the standard laws of physics.
mhm.
Um, yeah, it seems like it could just plausibly happen. We just don't know. But what about it?
So I actually have a somewhat different question that goes in a totally different direction. So I don't know if anyone have more on this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, not on this specifically, but I do have another question about prions. You go first,
Go
though.
on.
Okay. I was just gonna say prions have been around for a long time, in all likelihood. I mean, I think it's unlikely that prions just recently became a thing. So I think they've been around at going through. I mean, they've been around in nature for a long time, and so but there haven't, as far as we know, been any extinction events caused by prions.
That's a bad thing,
Uh,
And
actually.
we actually don't know specifically. That's number one. Number two, look at the well. See, this is like my galaxy brain argument because there's no. We do have animals that have air travel and they are birds, and birds have no known prion diseases. So the galaxy brain explanation for that is that there is a high level of selection pressure for their brain proteins such that they are resistant to prion diseases because there have been previous mass extinction events. I think that's a really stupid argument um, to make without evidence.
Yeah.
But like the thing is, if humans weren't around, I just based off of like deer travel patterns, I don't think it would wipe out deer in North America. And I don't know, and I think this is one of those things that like 200 years later, like the deer population will go back to normal, and like maybe they would some types like I think sometimes reindeer don't really are highly resistant to CWD, so it's possible that they might evolve a resistance to it. Like I don't think this is going to wipe out all the deer everywhere. I just think that if it wipes out like 10% of humans, it's still really bad, and in deer, it definitely wipes out more than 10% of deer.
sure, yeah, I guess additionally, what I would say is like prions. My understanding from what you said is that prions don't have a particularly strong, like any particularly strong selection pressure towards not being deadly, and because of that, it like bacteria haven't evolved to be particularly deadly because that's actually bad for fitness for those bacteria. But that just isn't the case with prions. So it just seems much more probable that if if prions with the capability of causing extinction are possible, it seems much more probable that they would have came about sometime in the past several hundred million years.
Well, yeah, the
Uh,
thing is, if it happened in like mice or deer, and there was a localized extinction, it wouldn't really look like anything. Like we don't really have protein samples that go back before the ice age. Wow, we probably do, but if that happened occasionally, we it's not obvious that we would see major signs. I think there's something to this, and I think like you can formulate hypotheses and look at the fossil record and like actually get information on how bad this could be. But like even moderately bad is still bad. And like beyond that, if we could, get really good at prime unfolding, it could like remember CWD is the lower end for how bad things can be. It's like here's an existence proof. It can be a lot worse. So it may well be the case that like you could theoretically engineer something that would never arise in nature, but like my gut feeling is you can't really wipe out all. I don't know what my gut feeling is. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. All right. I guess do we want to continue the do you want to continue the presentation? Because I don't.
Yeah. I need to finish this. We're near the end. Okay, so is this easier in super hacking? Yeah, because we don't know how to patch a specific vulnerability. Most 0 days can be patched. The ones that can't be patched, I don't know. I actually don't know what they do with vulnerabilities that can't be patched. I assume they do something with it. But yeah, if you're personally concerned about CJD, talk to an AlphaFold researcher. If you're doing some protein design stuff, maybe just like look at the thing to see if it kind of looks really weird before you do anything with it. We need more money into research and monitoring. This is really important. And you should do more research instead of less research, but just think before you publish anything. And for God's sake, don't open source Prion AlphaFold. You probably wouldn't do it anyways, but whatever. Okay, here are my sources. And here's last one is a meme because Soren asked me about my opinion on if the Zyzians are going to use this as a bioweapons. The Zyzians are not serious people. They failed at murdering an old man sleeping alone in his home and had to outsource murder to a local gangbanger. My message to the Zyzians is that you will never be a real terrorist. You have no ideology, no funds, and no followers. You are a homeless LARPer twisted by drugs and schizophrenia into a crude mockery of the weather underground. All the fear you get is joking and half-hearted. Behind your back, people mock you. Your parents are disgusted and ashamed of you. Less Wrong laughs at your ghoulish appearance behind closed doors. However, I will concede that they pose a significant STD risk to U.S. federal prison inmates, who they will meet after the murder trial. Okay, that's it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your presentation, Lao Mein. I really appreciate it. I had one question that kept popping up into my mind, and that is with cross domains, where like the this would be completely silly if it was not a known thing to happen with toxoplasm from cats that can cause humans to change behavior. Um, and this seems like the kind of thing that is extremely relevant for takeover scenarios to the extent that this is a thing that can be predicted and understood or like is a real thing. I understand that toxoplasm is a real thing that cause people to like change their personalities in meaningful ways. Do you think it would be possible to engineer a virus that has the same effect as toxoplasm? And do you think it would be possible to make a virus that has an even more targeted, different psychological effect?
We're gonna have to do the parasite conversation. So, one thing I've heard in evolutionary theory and parasite studies is that nothing in biology makes sense except for in light of parasites. So, you can look at the human hormone system, especially in men, and find some very suggestive findings. For example, if I were, let's say, an STD or some other type of parasite, and I really wanted to spread myself, the best way, if I find myself in really a female or a male host, is to upregulate testosterone, because that results in higher sex drive in both men and women. So what happens if you actually inject a human male with testosterone? What happens is, for every unit of testosterone you inject into the human, their body produces 1 unit of testosterone less. This is why bodybuilders, or men on testosterone replacement therapy, have to inject all of the testosterone their body needs, because like if you have 500 nanograms per deciliter production, um, and you inject like an equivalent amount exogenously, what happens is you end up with close to 500. You have to go if you want to go above your natural levels, you have to go beyond that. So like there are all of these mechanisms and organisms to like resist parasitism, and like the bigger the creature's brain is, the less likely there are to be like affected mentally by parasites. Like you have all of these funguses that mind control ants or whatever. The closest thing we have in mammals is literally just one disease, toxoplasmosis. There's some others. I won't get into it. But yeah, in general, like mammalian brains are pretty resistant against exogenous mind control by different species. So that's a point of hope, I guess. But yeah, no. If I were an AI and I wanted to like and I want to decrease humanity's ability to resist me, I would make something that's like COVID, long COVID, but like real. Like you don't make people dumber, right? Because that's easy to discover. Instead, you just make everyone like less motivated and more easily fatigued because like people convince themselves it's all in their heads or whatever. Like that would be my approach. You know, just make people
Is
more
there
boring and more
like
tired.
like the most obvious from a AI takeover scenario would be something like submissiveness? Is there a hormone that causes submissiveness? I don't actually know very much about like the psychology of brain. Would it in theory be possible to create a hormone that causes submissiveness?
I don't know if toxoplasmosis does that. I wouldn't be surprised if it does. In certain specific specific populations, generally increases aggression.
Wait, you really need submissiveness instead of, say, I don't know, very high openness and a very mimetic set of instructions?
But I'm very unclear about what the space of possible things are. Like, could you
I mean,
include?
but
Yeah.
a lot of things are possible in theory. Toxoplasmosis exists in reality, so it's like in real life, it's probably going to be hard to do. But like, we're talking about different levels of threats. You know, it's like, well, you could like hack someone's computer and like figure out really particular like hardware hacks and like cook their computer and like destroy the hardware, or you can just like steal their information and add it to a botnet, and like that's more destructive in the long run, arguably. But like, again, I'm talking about this can happen tomorrow level threats instead of like 2027 threats. So yeah.
Sure. I fully accept that the idea of a virus that doesn't kill the host but cause the host to get some hormones that causes submissiveness, that would be like what an AI that's trying to do a takeover would really like. But it's also something that where I have no idea about whether that's something that like possibly a super intelligence could do that, but could something that is like
I
just
mean,
barely above
yeah,
human level do
super.
that?
Yes, like I don't know. I mean, you have to understand toxoplasmosis really clearly, and there's like all of these different counter mechanisms that like try really hard because they don't because there's like a strong evolutionary pressure to not be parasitized. Um, I would lean towards it would take like borderline super intelligence, and I wouldn't like take it too seriously as a threat. But like something simpler, like something
Depression.
that just makes something that just makes everyone depressed, but like not so obviously depressed, but just a bit just like really lazy and less motivated in ways that like are hard to quantify. Like it's entirely possible to decrease someone's productivity by by like decreasing their IQ by 5 points and like just make them 50% lazier. Some people say that's what COVID does to people, but my counterpoint is that after 2 years of no exercise and like 3 or 4 years of aging, like it's hard to tell what's like in your head and what's long COVID.
Hmm.
Like I think people are just getting old.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Um. Yeah. I don't immediately have more questions. I don't know about the rest. Um.
No, I don't think I have any more questions.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
just
believe so.
I was just gonna say I feel mostly complete as well. And I guess on another note, I was also curious. Like, I do have some ideas about other things that I'd like to talk about that aren't related to this at all. But this seems like, I mean, it seems like we're mostly focused on talking about things that were brought up during like the presentation here. So I was wondering.
roughly what did you want to talk about?
Okay, well, I have a variety of things. One was I was curious to hear your guys' thoughts on open source AI. Um, Another one was I've had some thoughts on the external or I've had various thoughts on the alignment problem. I just so anyways, I don't want to go into that right now, but yeah.
So I think one thing we might want to do is to, stop the recording and say thank you, talk about what we are going to talk about next, and then perhaps if someone wants to talk, I don't have very much time, but I would certainly like to give my takes on some other topics. But
Sure.
should we say thank you, Lao Mein, again for your presentation?
Yes.
It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
No
you, Lao
problem.
Mein.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thanks.
and if I don't make a post in 2 weeks, remind me. Like actually bully me about it.
I will set a Google Calendar reminder to do so.
Yeah.
I cannot promise I will